Hello. So yes, I am Suzanne Bona. I'm the host and executive producer of Sunday Baroque, which is a nationally syndicated classical radio program distributed by WSHU Public Radio in Fairfield, Connecticut. So with that in mind, I want to give special thanks to Rima Dael, who is the general manager of WSHU Public Radio. Of course, also my colleague Jill Sorenson, the wizard of MusicMaster, Erin Joy Swank, who is our tech director, and all my colleagues at WSHU and with Sunday Baroque. So thank you so much to you also for participating. The title of this webinar is Crafting Diverse, Inclusive Playlists. Of course, as broadcasters, no matter what our format, our goal is to serve our listeners better by expanding the variety and elevating the quality of music programming they hear. To be clear, though, today's session is not a content session. You have to make the decisions about your specific programming goals. This session is the tactical, hands-on way to use your database, to use the tools, in my case, MusicMaster, to implement and track whatever goals you set. So this webinar really is about accountability. I do not rely on my good intentions or my gut feeling to accomplish my goals to diversify my playlists any more than I rely on my good intentions and gut feeling to program my playlists in general. And most of us do have some powerful tools at our disposal, these computer databases and scheduling systems that allow us to code our data and create comprehensive reports. It's how we put our good intentions into actual practice and how we check our work to make sure we're on the right track. It's almost like the air checking, version, right? But using it with your database. You want to check your work. You want to hear that what you are intending to say is actually what you're saying. And of course, you can also use this to implement your diversity strategy and track your progress and create reports that can be helpful for your programming staff, your management, your board, your licensee, and your funders. Now, I do use MusicMaster as my database. Jill Sorenson is the MusicMaster wizard, but these principles really are general enough that you should be able to adapt them to whatever you are using. If you're using an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of your database. So I met with Jill to add some new categories to my data, and specifically to the composer and performer fields. And the attributes I asked to reflect were gender, sexual orientation, race and nationality, and physical ability. So again, composer and performer fields, gender, sexual orientation, race, nationality, physical ability. And as I fill in this information in my database, I'm able to produce reports that show me exactly what I am doing. And that's the accountability piece of this. Again, just because it's on our minds doesn't mean it's showing up on our playlist. And it's just all too easy to fall back on the assumption, the false assumption, that simply being an ally and simply having good intentions automatically translates into some meaningful output. So I'm going to turn this over to Jill now to kind of summarize how she took in this big ask when we had our first meeting.
Thank you, Suzanne. It wasn't necessarily a big ask, but the important part was that Suzanne called us to discuss this. We like to be on the ground floor and be at that point where we understand what you want to do as an end user. So to have that conversation lets us help you with our best practices, as well as play devil's advocate with the intent and goal of making sure that whatever we're going to do, it's going to accomplish the goal you want. So as Suzanne indicated, through that conversation, it came down to two groups that it applied to, her composer and her performer. And then it was, well, what diversity concepts? And she listed all those, and we'll be showing you and talking to you about those. And so at that particular point, then we're ready to go. So what I'd like to do now is walk you through that process in MusicMaster. Two things to keep in mind. First of all, I know that we've got many people who are participating today who are in the commercial formats. So what you're about to see in Suzanne's data is actually has many fields involved in it. You may only need one or two. So the classical format just in and of itself lends itself to a lot of data and a lot of possibilities. So take what's important for you. I'll be going back and forth between a couple of different databases and showing you that. So while I switch, apparently it's some sort of weird time zone as I go ahead and bring this up on the screen. So you're going to see some sort of tunneling going on. But then what I'm going to do is go ahead and share the screen. And it's not allowing me to do that. Oh, wow.
All right. While you're working that, I'll just remind people that you will be able to ask questions, as Erin mentioned. You can put your questions, hit the little question mark, and you can submit your questions there. We will get to those at the end of this session because we'd like to just sort of lay it all out for you. Oh, there you are. You good?
Yeah, sorry about that. I figured out the button I was missing. So
okay.
And there is the. There is the tunneling effect, and now you should all be seeing my software. Is that correct, Suzanne? You can see that?
Yes. Yes.
All right, terrific. Because I'm actually not going to be looking at the camera now while I'm doing this. So let's start at the basics. Suzanne decides we have to do this for composer, and we have to do this for performer, and we have those 5 fields. So you're going to start by going to Dataset, Library, and Fields. When you are here, you are going to add the fields that you need. And I'll do that in a moment. I just want you to see that we've got the pairs for each one of these. We've got the composer, the performer, and so on all the way down the line. To add a field, click the button, and you're off and running. Give it the name you want. You're likely going to make this an attribute multiple field and give it a length of about 15. That's the number of different codes that you could put on the field. I sincerely doubt you're going to come up with more than 15 different gender codes. So 15 is a good number. You're going to go through this process, add all of those fields. Now, keep in mind, once you've added these fields, you can think about adjusting your library design, your schedule editor design, your F9 replacement window design in the software. These fields will be available on all of your filtering as well. So now we've made the fields. Next, we have to give those codes. So you go to Dataset, Library, and Attributes. And you can see right off the bat that we have the gender field there, but I'm going to go down to the performers. And you notice how nothing changed on the screen except the name. So that's a key point I'll get to in just a moment. She's named the codes. The only thing that I would tell you while you're doing that, when you name the codes, make it something obvious for yourself that you're going to remember. You will always have the ability to use the edit helper to look to see what your codes are. But for instance, if I open up her nationality, G is German is really obvious in a classical format. But you can see she's using all kinds of other different characters to come up with all the different nationalities she wanted. If I scroll really far down, she's also using lowercase g. So when you think nationality and G, you probably are going to go to German. So make the code obvious. So those 2 steps probably aren't going to take you very long. Hopefully this session gives you an idea of what fields you actually want, what diversity you want to do. So with that in place, it's time to do the data entry. Now, in a commercial format, you probably have 300 to 500 songs. My recommendation is sort it by the most obvious field to do whatever you're doing, likely artist, and go down the field and do it. For the classical, actually, I want everyone to look. It's 18,662 here. That's how many pieces Suzanne has in her active library. Those are the only 2 categories I have up here. That's a lot of material. So your key is going to be doing some sort of filter. And certainly from a commercial standpoint, you can do the same thing. You're just not going to get as many hits. So watch what happens when I just very quickly find the composer field and just say Bach. Now, am I going to get more than what you may be thinking of? Yes, I will. And you can see I get some other composers, but you also see that I'm going to get JS and all of his children. Now, why is this important? to look at the number, almost 4,000. That's a huge chunk of her library, which means now, you see how she's got all the M's? See how she's got all the G's? That's really easy to do because all you have to do is go to our mass changer and assign the specific code. You know it's G for German, you can go ahead and do that. So if you can filter your list, get to what you want, no matter what coding you're doing, the mass changer can help you get to that, get those values into the system quickly. And that's really the key here so that you can see what kind of data you have, what kind of changes you want to make. So we've added some fields, we've put in some codes. We're going to go with we've got the data entry in. Now what do? Well, I'm actually going to switch to a different set of data. This is my classical database where I also have nationality for the composer. And the next thing you do is library analysis. This tells you what you have. Now, the pie view can get a little difficult to read depending on how far we have to slice it up, but you can certainly see over on the left-hand side all the different nationalities that I have in my data and what those percentages are. And again, in the classical format, no one's going to be surprised that German, Austrian, and Italian are at the top. The purpose of doing library analysis is to give you the informed decision-making that you're going to then have as you move forward. And what I mean by that is looking at what you have allows you to know if you're going to make a rule, is it going to be hard? Is it going to be easy? The beautiful part about library analysis is you can come in here and you can do it for your orchestra. You can do it in Suzanne's data. She can do it for any of the other diversity fields she has. You don't have to close it and reopen it. So I have this big chunk of 3 nationalities with double-digit percentage-wise density in the data. So that informs my decision because the next step, if you want to, is creating rules. Now, as the human, you can make rules that are super hard, super easy, no rules at all. It's always your choice. You can always override them in the schedule editor as well. And so at that point, it's a matter of what you want to do. I went ahead and made a rule group and put it in my breakable folder, and I just added all of my nationalities. Now, the one point of context for you, in my data, I play 4 pieces an hour in the classical library, right? So when you see title separation of 5, you know right away, I'm only ever going to have 1 French composer in an hour. But of course, if you look at Austrian, German, and Italian, it's 2. Why did I do that? My density is such that if I went to 5, it would make it very difficult to schedule. So what I'm looking for is that balance. And so that's why I did that. Again, totally a programming decision on your part. That's what I did. You get to choose what you do. There really are, though, sort of 3 sets of rules types you can consider. You want to do time or title separation. So much time or titles have to go by. You want to protect against some other codes. So are there some codes here that are similar enough that you wouldn't want them to play near each other? That's what those 2 rules do. And then the rules that you might find most valuable, depending on how you're going to approach this diversity coding, would be your min-max quotas. So you are all sitting in a room and your feet are on the floor and you can look up and you can see your ceiling. That's min-max quota. Minimum per hour. That's the floor. Must have that many. And the ceiling is the maximum per hour. So now you've got some rules in place, and now you're ready to go ahead and schedule. And I'm going to switch back to Suzanne's data. This was her log from this past Sunday. Now you can see I have I've got some of the performer fields in here, and you can see those codes. That's great. You obviously have that information available to you in the replacement window as well. But really, at this particular point now, with a log, you can start to have your accountability. And I suggest you do that by using the instant analysis, which I have over here on the right, and set up by going to the schedule analysis and then instant analysis. And you can see I have some panels listed here. These are really easy to configure. And in fact, I would encourage you to do this for lots of different things to keep track of what's going on. For instance, if you're a commercial station and you want your day to have a certain speed to it, you would be able to use this. If you wanted to make sure from a classical standpoint, you had certain amount of different musical periods, you could use this. So lots of capability there. I'll just go ahead and open up one so you can see what I did. In Suzanne's case, I did it for the whole day. And I think that's fairly appropriate for what we're talking about here. I picked the specific code, and all of the codes are listed here. So you can dig right down all of those nationalities. If she wanted to know how much Slovenian she had in her show every week, she could do that. You always want to do this against scheduled songs. And that's because you don't want it to include unscheduled positions when it's doing those calculations. You also want it to do it on music. The display, there's lots of choices here. I like count and total percentage, and you get to name it. If you really have ranges that you want to be within, you can do your low and high, and that will change the coloring over here if you're outside the bounds. Once you've made one, start cloning them. Once you've cloned it, all you're ever going to have to do is change the target and change the label and perhaps the low-high numbers. And so that lets you build this very quickly. And the panel is activated by using the wrench icon and clicking it off. I've docked it. You can float it. I know lots of people have multiple monitors, so this might be something you put on a second monitor. And now we can actually see in this particular log what she had. Now, my concern and my caution for you here is to not get overly bogged down in this one day. So she's playing 30 selections, and you can see her percentages all the way across the board. But that's just one day. Your real accountability comes with the history browser. In Suzanne's case, we ended up having this conversation at a point in time where the division becomes very easy. In the first 5 months of the year, she wasn't really coding for this and thinking about this. And starting in June, she was. So there's the result, but I'll show you how I got there. I went ahead and picked the first 5 months of the year. I'm only picking her show. Depending on what you're doing, especially on the commercial side, you're probably going to leave all the green dots to do the whole day. If you're only doing classical in certain hours, then I would go ahead and set it up that way. I'm only picking her active categories, what she's rotating. And then in the display, I've picked that field. All the other ones that she has available are there. So we could pick them as well. I want to see the turnover, so I changed that option. I do want to see the rank. And now here's our result. Now remember, this is the first 5 months of the year when she's not either thinking about this or consciously doing it, or maybe doing it by her gut or her feel. Nothing statistical, nothing that can be quantified. And so you can see what her numbers are and just the number of spins. The bottom graph, for her purposes, spins density or airtime density are really useful to look at because it gives you that percentage. With classical having such a range of run times, you can see how you might get some difference based on how long the piece is and the airtime density versus just the spins, which is this raw number. So this is when Suzanne is not thinking about this. Then she codes for this and has diversity and a diversified playlist in mind as she's creating it. So we're going to change the time frame, and we're just going to make it June 1st. And she's actually finished her logs through the end of October. So it's a 5 month and 5 month window. It's absolutely equal. And I want you to see how these numbers have changed. So where before we had black at 60, now black is at 65. It's gone up a little bit. But really, it's the Asian and the Latinx X numbers where you really see the difference. Her Asian number a little more than doubles. Her Latinx number almost triples. And that's because she is looking at this information, she is coding for it, and she is consciously trying to make a diverse playlist. And so there is plan, do, check, and act. Figure out what your fields are, add them, put in your codes, do your library analysis, determine what kind of rules you want, and then check it daily if you'd like with instant analysis, or check it over time with the history browser. Suzanne, I'm going to switch it back to you.
Yeah. So I would say that it's not that this was not on my radar or that I wasn't doing it. It's really that, as you say, like there was no way for me to be accountable because it was all here. It had, this is where I was relying on storing it. It's definitely been a goal. And I believe that by virtue of just watching this webinar today, pretty much everybody has that same goal, that you're interested in doing this, that your heart is in the right place and your intentions are good. And you're looking for a way to craft some tool or use some tool that can check your work. And, this was really helpful. This is a lot of it's not hugely surprising for me. It was why I wanted to do this. So I think there probably are going to be some questions. So we can maybe move to that section now if we've got some questions.
My apologies for, sort of misrepresenting that. You're absolutely correct. I mean, you are thinking about it. It's the quantifying it. That's the important part.
Yeah. And doing it in a strategic and planned way, because again, it's like we don't rely on gut for our programming goals in other areas of what we do. We have tactics we use, we have goals, we have parameters. And so this is simply a natural extension of what we're already doing. It's just with different types of information.
And one of the things I didn't mention, I had the before and after with, that history browser report. That's a little bit of revisionist history, right? So she's been trying to do this and getting this included. She doesn't really know, though, what she's done. And so that's where you can see, the history browser allows you to go back in time. So even though she's only been consciously putting those codes on for the last few months, any other plays in the past now have those codes. And so that's why you can see that dramatic difference, especially with the Latinx and the Asian numbers. She was doing it. She just didn't know it, couldn't quantify it. And that can be helpful for anyone who starts to do this and says, oh, okay, so what did it look like before? And now what does it look like now?
Yeah.
So I think, yes, I think at this point, we would be happy to entertain questions.
Oh.
So Jaden, what we're going to do is we're going to get your contact information offline, and we will be able to answer your sales questions and answer specific cost-related questions with you directly. We'll just make sure that we have all of your contact information, and then we'll be able to answer that one for you directly. I am being told there are no other questions, Suzanne.
Wow. You were just so explicit and so clear.
Well, I don't know about that, but I appreciate that.
So I do. Wait. Here you go. So how do you address composers and performers who are multiracial in this approach to coding? Have you encountered any issues with making assumptions about how someone identifies? That's a really good question. So I for things like sexuality and whatnot, I defer to what is in the public realm. If a Sharon Isbin is a lesbian, she has written articles about it, she's answered that in interviews and whatnot, I would not. And this actually gets into things like composers from the Baroque era who were presumed to be gay, for example, or so I've tried to be judicious about that because, again, we can't really know some people. Some people swear that Handel was gay, for example, or, so I try, and Corelli, same thing. And so, I think we pretty much know that Johann Sebastian Bach was probably not gay. So I feel pretty comfortable listing him as straight. And I don't say that to be funny, but I mean, that's kind of how the measuring stick works for me is it has to be really obvious for someone who's been dead for a couple hundred years for me to make that assumption about him. But for current, for contemporary performers, for example, or more recent performers, I do not make any assumption. I try to defer to their public pronouncements about it. Sarah Davis Buchner is a transgender woman, and that is in the public, realm. When it comes to multiracial or multi-ethnic, you can put more than one. I mean, Nokatula Ngwenyama is Japanese and I believe Zimbabwean descent. So I just put them both. And that's the beauty of this too, is that you can have, it's like the census, or it's better than the census because you can put, multiple categories in.
And that's actually
yeah, go ahead.
Right, that's the point I wanted to make sure is very clear. When we built those fields, remember we were talking about, make it 15. That's the number of different codes you could put on. So in the case she just described, we can put the Japanese code, the Zimbabwe code, up to 15 different ones. And so if you feel like in your format, there may be people where you're going to have a lot of different codes, then simply make that field larger. 15 seemed like a good number where it was big enough where you're not likely to have any problems, but not so large that it becomes an unmanageable sized field and you might accidentally put things in that you didn't want to. So, you have that capability because you've made it an attribute multiple field to put as many codes given the limit of the field size that you'd like to do.
Mm-hmm. There was a question that just flashed about, do we talk about this or do we just
I'll go ahead. Can we put that question up again? So
this. So this, I think, is like a show prep question, really, or a content question. It depends, and as I talked about in the PRPD session, which was the conference session that many of you did not participate in, but a couple of weeks ago, it was really more of the content of this versus the implementation. I have different, your show prep is voluminous, right? And sometimes you pick this material and sometimes you pick that material. So for example, I might talk about a woman composer from the Baroque era in terms of she was very prolific and she played the harpsichord and she did this and she did that. And here's music that she composed. In the promo or the billboard for that hour, I might talk about, many of the women, we don't know of all that many women composers from the Baroque era. Most of them were nuns. And that was an environment where they were able to thrive and it was socially acceptable and it was available to them to be a composer and to have their work performed. So, again, this really is a content and show prep issue. I use it in that way, and I also have performers I've interviewed. So for example, I might play Ann Hobson-Pilot, who is the now retired harpist from the Boston Symphony Orchestra, who has a beautiful recording, a solo recording. And I happened to have interviewed her several months ago. And she told some really amazing stories about lots of different things. So when I play her recordings, I am sending people to our website to listen to my interview with her. And I might, in that interview, in the context of the show, I might simply say, this is this beautiful piece and she's playing it and it was originally for flute or whatever and, blah, blah, blah. But then I might say, I had a chance to speak with Ann Hobson-Pilot recently about her long career in the Boston Symphony. And she shared some really poignant and in some cases very painful stories about being the first Black person in the orchestra and some of the really abusive behavior she endured. And she talked about some fun things. And I encourage you to go listen to this interview and you can find it on sundaybaroque.org in the interview section. So that's how I choose to use the information. We're all, none of us is all about one thing in our life, right? And I try to focus predominantly on the fact that these are remarkable musicians, whether they're the performers or the composers. Like, it's about the music. And it's also about the fact that some of these people whose music we are relishing and appreciating had some pretty big obstacles and had some pretty big stumbling blocks to overcome. And here is their story, sometimes in their own words. So I don't know. That was a very long-winded answer. Does that answer your question? I hope that answers your question.
I think there was. I'm getting some echo.
There was another question after that from.
It was a question about blanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the question I wanted to address. So in the cases where the data is unclear, do you leave the attribute blank, and does that impact the reports that you run? So yes, it's going to have an impact one way or the other. If you don't have the data, that's better than putting in bad data, of course. And again, we can quantify that by including that in some of the reports. Like, we've got this many titles that don't have anything in that field, include the blanks. So, we've got ways to do that. I think library analysis is a great way to help you with that, because you will get a option where it says blanks. So it will tell you how far along you are in the process. You can obviously always sort the column, and the blanks will come up to the top. Mm-hmm. But it certainly does have an impact, because if you are playing 30 selections like Suzanne had in her log, and 15 of them don't have anything in that field, to say that, again, how you set up those analysis and do that can have an impact. If I say I want to see the scheduled music, that way you're looking at what's there. And so that, you're including what is there. And that, I think, is what the main key is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really good point, because and I did want to make that point, that this, just like creating interesting playlists, in this case, that have more diversity based on some of these characteristics, it's an ongoing process, and it's also an ongoing process to get the database whipped into shape. So, I've been working on it. It's been a few months. I'm a one-woman band, and what I've been trying to do is not only do the mass changes in some places, but there are a lot of, smaller scale things where I can't, they have to be done manually. They're not all Bach. So what I'm doing, as a short-term stopgap for some of that, is I'm trying to do that when I program a playlist. I especially for this session, I would go in and make sure that the coding was there for as many of the things that I did use on those shows that I knew we were going to analyze, just so that we could, have as much of an apples to apples kind of comparison as possible. But that's a very good point, because yes, obviously, if the data are not there, then you're not getting an apples to apples comparison.
And attrition is a great way to approach it, especially in the classical format, because that, as you're listening and creating that playlist, it's right there. So take a few minutes and go ahead and put that coding in right away. And yes, with some of the mass changes, you're going to get a significant chunk done. So this does not have to be an overwhelming or a large project, or, oh my gosh, it's going to take me forever to do this. There are definitely ways that you can speed that up.
Yeah. So there was a question about nationality coding from John. Thank you. So, that's if you're using MusicMaster, you can do mass changes. And that's kind of what I did too. Like I sorted for any composer, and that I only had nationality. There is a nationality field in MusicMaster. And so I would just sort, okay, any nationality field that said German, sort for that. And then I would just make the mass change for all of those, I would trust that they were accurate, but I would make the mass change for all of those, and then just delete it in that field. So that's how I'm plowing through those. But then I see there's another question about results from listener audience between old gut feeling. I think it's too soon in terms of a data, an audience data kind of thing. I will tell you that anecdotally, and, believe me, I realize that that's a loaded word in our business, but anecdotally, because we don't yet have the opportunity to use any audience data yet, people are noticing. many people are saying to me, like, I really, I love how diversity, I love how every week I hear women composers from the Baroque era. I love how, I've been introduced to these new performers that I never heard. I also have a companion blog, a daily blog where I'm posting something from interesting, wonderful musicians. And again, we're pushing people to that blog called Beautiful Music in Difficult Times, started at the beginning of the pandemic. And then also these interviews, which is a podcast. So we're driving people to that and getting that kind of feedback loop as well from people consuming those resources. But yeah, I mean, I think at this point, it's still going to be wait and see what the change will be.
How do MusicMaster playlists employing this coding reflect the added and refined attributes? I'm not sure I understand that question.
I don't either.
When you, and so we may need to follow up with you directly on that particular question. What I can say generically is that you have the control. So like John Pittman's question about, I like your nationality coding better. That's under your control. So you get to define what those codes are. So for instance, we've been talking about the race. If there are other races you want to include there, she can do that. She's got 4 right now that are important for her. She's got that whole list of the nationalities. So you have that capability to adjust that as you go. And believe me, no matter what you're using, it should be a living, breathing mass of information. And so if you're not using something like library analysis on a regular basis to see what you have, I'd highly encourage that. My favorite analogy with this is, you're on a deserted road. There's no other cars in sight, and you're driving 45 miles an hour down the road, and you take your hands off the steering wheel. Does it go straight? Does it pull left or right? It's the old way to figure out, do you need a front end alignment? Right? So you never want to wake up one day and go, wow, why is our station sounding so fill in the blank? Too much 20th century, too fast, too slow, too happy, too sad, whatever that is, whatever those codes are. You don't want to wake up one day and go, why do we sound that way? The problem is for so many programmers, the data changes every week, just a little bit. I add some songs, I take some songs out, right? And so over time, you don't get it. So you just want to be looking at library analysis, looking at your codes and making sure they're always still applicable.
Look at the question here, Jill. He has a lot of nationality info in a text field that's readable on the printed playlist. And does this coding ideally replace that? Yeah, I mean,
that's a great question. Yeah, it really can. And so the methods that we've talked about, so you've got this text field where you have this information. Do what Suzanne talked about. I'm just going to go search for German, right? So go to that field, do the query for that field that says contains German. Double check it to make sure it looks like what you want. Then go to your new field and say mass assign G for German and go down the list. So you may, and in Suzanne's case, what she's doing is taking these old fields, looking at what's in there, using the sorts, creating and putting the information in the new fields, and then she'll eventually not use those old fields.
Right. I do want to just back up, and this is just a very brief one, but Mark Michaud asked if we get going, like in other words, if someone attending this gets going and has questions, can you be contacted, Jill? I think people probably have their own MusicMaster reps, but
that's correct. And we'll be putting up a card at the end of the session. But yeah, feel free to contact us through our website or contact us by phone. And yes, you likely have a specific MusicMaster consultant who is aware of this session, knows the kinds of things we've been talking about, and will be able to answer all of your questions.
There's a question from Jaden. I'm pretty new to understanding program directing. What does it mean to reconcile a log, and what would the reconciliation process be for a diverse playlist? Same as any playlist, really.
Yeah, so it doesn't have any impact in it. All you're saying when you reconcile a log is this is what actually played. So for many people and many programmers, they have an automation system where the audio of that piece is listed, and then the automation system creates a report. And then what you do is that reconcile process. In the old days, when I was still doing programming, it was you had the paper log, and someone said, no, I didn't play it, and they scratched it out, and they scribbled in what they did play, and then I had to go and do all that manually. So however you do it, what you're doing is you're saying this is the playlist that you create in MusicMaster is what you are sending to say this is what I want to play. And then whether it's a paper log coming back to you, an automated log from your automation system, this is what actually happened. So the diversity and your coding has nothing to do with any of that.
Right. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
Right. So the additional follow-up here from one of our other participants is that the thought was maybe that this playlist question is not whether or not you're putting gender info on the playlist for the announcer's benefit. Again, this is like Suzanne talked about. How do you talk about these kinds of things? The fields that you have in your MusicMaster data are always available to be put on your printed log. So at that particular point, if you have that information and you want to share it, you certainly can do that. It's not a problem. You just adjust your printed log design and you can put it on there.
Yeah. Anyone else? Well, I want to first of all thank you again, Jill, and thank Rima and WSHU and Aaron for being part of this, and thank all of you for participating, because again, I think that it's implicit that your participation indicates that you are an ally and that you're someone who takes this seriously and understands that this is how we serve our listeners better. And how we learn and how we do better. So I commend you for that, and I thank you for your attention. And you absolutely can and should get in touch with MusicMaster. And you can see the support information. There was also a blog about this. And I think even the PRPD panel session with John Clare and Daniel Gillum and Frank Dominguez and myself is also available as a recording if you want to go back and check out just sort of how some of us are doing this. This is not the end. This is but a beginning baby step that all of us, this is, as I see it, as I've said, this is an all hands on deck moment. We all should be doing this for a variety of reasons, including the fact that it serves our listeners better. And these are some tactics to serve your listeners better. And again, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. To leave, all you have to do is close your browser window. Hopefully you can understand me this time. And once again, we are leaving the audience availability. So if you know somebody in the audience and you want to video chat with them, you can click on their face and have a private chat. Thanks for joining us.